All right, welcome back, guys, to another online video lecture. This is now week 4, and it's the age of Jackson, mainly revolving around the 7th president of the United States, Andrew Jackson. Um, he becomes basically a war hero from the War of 1812, and 12 years after the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson uses his popularity among the common people to win the presidency, and he changes the role of the president forever. So we're going to look at a couple of things like that. So here's the basic overview of the Age of Jackson. This chapter covers the presidency of Andrew Jackson. You will learn about the growth of democracy, problems with Native American policies, tensions between the states and the federal government, and the economy of the United States during Jackson's time as president. So again, I got to make this very clear. Andrew Jackson, not much of a politician. Okay, he's just a war hero that kind of uses his fame to win the presidency, win the common people's vote. So when he takes over office, he's going to do some peculiar things, and a lot of it's going to be bad. Like, for example, Andrew Jackson is probably one of the worst 5 presidents of all time, just because of the policies he does. But you can look at the year there, 1824 to 1836. So he wins re-election, and we'll kind of go through all that process coming forward here. So let's just dive into it. All right. So the main idea of Section 1 is Andrew Jackson's election as president in 1828 brought in a new era of popular democracy. So why does this matter? Okay, Jackson's use of presidential powers laid the foundation for the modern president. So just like George Washington and his precedents, Andrew Jackson also set some precedents, and that's why we kind of spend some time in looking at him. So we're going to look at his presidency, how he affects the presidency, and also, what policies does he put in place, because there's some pretty bad ones out there that affect a lot of people. So let's look through it. So major points of emphasis during the Jacksonian era. Okay, the common man becomes important in politics rather than just the wealthy man. Issues with Native American, states' rights, and the National Bank of the United States will be some of the topics we cover. And issues with critics of the way Jackson ruled the nation. A lot of people thought that he became too powerful. So much so that his rival factions started giving him the nickname King Andrew, or King Jackson, because they thought that he was trying to become a king. And obviously in America, people did not want that. So we'll kind of take a look and see how he maybe misconstrued the rules to make the presidency more powerful than maybe what it should be. So let's look at the election of 1824 first. The Democratic Republicans, yes, they were one party at one time, had some disagreements that ended with 4 people trying to run as president under the Democratic Republican Party. So they had 4 people running under one party name. As you know, if you have 4 people running under one party, that's going to divide the votes up 4 different ways. So Andrew Jackson easily won the popular vote, the vote cast by the people, but there was no clear winner in the Electoral College. Even if you win the popular vote, it doesn't mean you automatically become president. You have to win the Electoral College. So Jackson was a common man. That was his push, and he was kind of the first politician to ever kind of dub himself the common man. And nowadays, you have every president. They're going out to the steel factory, or they're heading out to the coal mines to showcase that I'm just a common guy. I'm just like you. Where that's normally not the case. Normally, our presidents are a little bit above the common man when it comes to maybe finances in particular. Especially our current president. But Jackson actually was a common man. He had been born poor. He was orphaned at the age of 14. He was just kind of this soft-spoken guy from Tennessee. He was a war hero. Okay, so he had a lot of things going his way that made the public love him. So, because there was a tie of the Electoral College votes, the election had to be decided in the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives did not pick Andrew Jackson. They chose John Quincy Adams, who was the son of former President John Adams and also former Sons of Liberty member John Adams. So Jackson felt as though the election had been stolen away from him and that the people of the United States had been ignored and that he had been cheated out of the president that they wanted. All right, so over the next 4 years, the split between Jackson and the common people of the U.S. and the more privileged people like John Adams led to the complete split of the Democratic-Republican Party. So now we have a split. We have the Democrats, who are Jackson, and we have the National Republicans, which is Adams. So we have the Democrats and the Republicans, but their ideologies are totally opposite from what they are today. For example, the Democrats are in the South and the Republicans are in the North. And from modern day stereotypes, the Republicans would be today's liberals, and the Democrats would be the modern day Republicans. Okay, so a little bit confusing there, but they're just kind of flipped back in this time. And obviously, as the years go on, we'll see them flip to become what they are today. And it's not going to be until basically the Civil War. So the election of 1828 comes up, which is the development of modern American politics. It's the first election in the United States where all white males only get to vote. Before, you had to own property, and before you had to have some type of taxation rights to be able to vote. Well, now everybody who is white and who is a man gets to vote for the first time in American history. So Jackson ran for president once again, but this time he defeats Adams because more people got the right to vote. And again, it was mainly more kind of common, poorer folk that got to vote, and thus they're going to vote for the common man, Andrew Jackson. So he wins. So during the campaign, he promoted his version of democracy in which the majority would rule and the power would be taken away from the rich elite and given to the people. And this becomes known as Jacksonian democracy. All right, so it's kind of similar to Jeffersonian democracy with Thomas Jefferson, kind of what he did when he was president and what he wanted it to be. And Jackson's democracy, as you guys can kind of scan through the chart here, it's very similar in some ways, just little tweaks here or there. But for the most part, Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson, their ideologies or their philosophies are very similar when it comes to how the country should be run. Now, one thing that Jackson does, or he implements, that's a precedent today, is called the spoils system. So he starts it, but every president since him has utilized it. And it's basically like you're going to spoil your supporters. Okay, people who helped you become president, you're going to help them out. You're going to kind of give them a sweet job, maybe a high-paying job, maybe more of a status job. Okay, but they helped you out. They helped you become president, so you kind of throw them a bone. You throw them a little reward. So patronage. When presidents give people that they have supported them key positions in their own administration. To the victor belongs the spoils. The winner should get all the possessions and all the power from the loser. It is a common practice for presidents to be able to appoint cabinet members, etc. But this was the first time a president has totally cleaned house. Like if you were a cabinet member before, sometimes a few of you got to stay for the next presidency. But Andrew Jackson was the first time that a president came to office and said, "You're all fired. I'm bringing in my own guys. I'm bringing in people that I know, that I trust, that help me become president." All right. So he basically replaces all the appointed position with his supporters. Some people felt this was way too much power for a president to have and that the system was corrupt, but Jackson basically defended his actions by saying that it's actually a major part of democracy because I'm going to break the last group's power over Washington policy. It's basically saying like, yep, every president should be able to break the last president's policies because now I'm president, so I'm running the country that I want to run it. That's kind of what Jackson's saying. All right, so let's look at one of the things that Jackson does that's actually pretty bad, and that's the policy towards Native Americans. All right, so main point, during Jackson's presidency, Native Americans were forced to move west of the Mississippi River. Why this matters? The forced removal changed forever the lives of Native Americans in the United States. And we get this thing, he introduces the Indian Removal Act. All right. It just basically gave Andrew Jackson the power to negotiate resettlement treaties with Native Americans and allowed states to also make treaties. All right. And basically what we get is we're going to forcefully remove all Native Americans and we're going to move them west. Okay. So any Native Americans in the lands basically east of the Appalachian Mountains, you're going to be forcefully removed from your lands and you're going to move west. Okay. That's the whole idea. All right. And what ends up happening is we get a whole bunch of fights between the government and different tribes. Some tribes just saw the inevitable, sold their land and left. Others tried to stay and fight. All right, and one of the worst cases that comes out of this Indian Removal Act is the Trail of Tears, one of the worst events in U.S. history, really a dark spot on our country's past. So the Trail of Tears is the forced removal of Cherokee Indians from native lands, mainly in we'll say Florida and Georgia area. and they're going to be moved to Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. Basically, all the reservations that have been set up there. Because they wanted their lands for farming and for gold, it was called the Trail of Tears because natives were forced by the military to walk hundreds of miles to resettle in lands they didn't have any knowledge of. So, for example, the Cherokee were forced to leave their homes with little more than the clothes on their backs. The march lasted months, and it actually happened during the winter. So a lot of Native Americans died on the journey. About 25% of them did not make it thanks to starving, the cold, or some type of disease. Okay, but just let you know that there are some Native American tribes that stayed and fought for their land, ultimately lost, but just let you know that some people did stand up, others sold, and others were forced to leave. Another big thing that happens during Jackson's is the conflict between state rights. There's a big rift going on right now in the country. The North wants tariffs. Remember, tariffs makes imported or international products more expensive, and normally it helps out your domestic products. So the North, obviously, they're more manufacturing and selling goods, so they want people to buy their product, compared to international products. Now, the bad thing about tariffs is we know that it leads to other countries responding with their own tariffs. So the South, who they export a lot of their goods or they sell it to international markets, now tariffs are being put on their products, so they're selling less. So the South is making less money, the North is making more money thanks to these tariffs. And eventually what we get is kind of an abomination cross. South Carolina is threatening to secede from the Union. We know that they do to start the Civil War, but this is like, 1830s, so about 25 years beforehand-ish, okay? And eventually what happens is Andrew Jackson kind of folds a little bit. He lowers the tariff, but he also says that if you try to secede, we will send the U.S. military to get you back. So be happy I'm lowering the tariff. If you try to do anything crazy, just let you know that the U.S. military will be there to bring you back in by force. All right, so that's kind of that. The other thing that Jackson does is he literally attacks the National Bank. He thinks the National Bank is too powerful, especially this guy named Nicholas Beadle, who's kind of running it. He thinks that there's some corruption that's happening between different Congress members and Beadle, because Beadle kind of has the right to give the money to certain people if he wants to. So Jackson basically denied, when the charter comes up, basically when the operating license comes up for the following year, Jackson vetoes it. Congress says, yep, perfect, let's do another round, another year of the National Bank. Jackson vetoes it, which leads to the Congress having to ratify the president, checks and balances. So anyways, the Congress passes the bill anyways with a 2/3 majority vote. And people are just kind of mad at Andrew Jackson, kind of pissed at him because he is ignoring all these decisions. All right, so despite the fact that Jackson and the bank, round one, the bank wins, Jackson wins re-election and kind of sees this as a sign that, yep, the common people voted me in again because they want this bank gone. So I need to make the bank my public enemy number one. I need to make the bank my top priority. So during his second term, Jackson began having all federal money deposited into state banks. Basically, he's making the federal bank give away all their money to these state banks. They're called pet banks. And that's kind of how Jackson takes down his bank. So he ends up winning the war on the National Bank of the United States, but future problems with the economy would be the result. So Jackson screws over the economy, basically. He ends the National Bank, gives them all the state banks, but now the national economy goes down the drain. But Jackson's already out of office before stuff kind of hits the fan. So the next man in line, Martin Van Buren, basically is chosen president, or, wins the election. And his main presidency is trying to fix the economy that Jackson had destroyed. And so Van Buren's presidency is seen as a big failure, mainly because Jackson screwed up so bad that even Van Buren, the next president, had to deal with all the issues, and he couldn't even fix it, okay, from an economic standpoint. So like I said, to wrap things up here, we got about 50 seconds. This would be a political cartoon that you would see common with Andrew Jackson. You see him here, King Andrew. That's the symbolism. As you can see down by his feet there, it's the Constitution, so it's ripped up. He's stepping on it. Right here he has veto, because that's what he did all the time. He vetoed everything. So it's just a pretty good cartoon to depict what people thought of Andrew Jackson if you were against him. You thought that he was a tyrant. You thought that he was trying to make himself king. He expanded the presidential powers too far. He did all these bad things like the Trail of Tears, the Tariff of Abomination, all these things. But this is the basic overview of what we need to know. And for this week, you guys will get some different assignments that go with it.